Welcome back everyone to the RDH Code. In this video, let's learn about the fundamentals of working with forms in Svelte. If you are a front-end developer, you probably know that a considerable amount of work has to do with building forms. So it's really important that we understand how to capture user inputs using various types of form controls. Well, we have inputs, text areas, single select controls, multi-select controls, single checkbox, group of checkboxes, and of course radio buttons. Once we capture the values from the user, we also have to learn how to submit those form values. We are not talking about submitting to an API, but having a submit button that can at least log the form data to the console is definitely required. As you can see, we have a lot to learn about form handling, which is why I have split this topic into two videos. In this video, we will understand how to work with inputs text areas, single select drop-down controls, and multi-select controls. In the next video, we will learn about a single checkbox, group of checkboxes, radio buttons, and also how to submit the form on a click of a button. Let's begin for our example. Let's consider a job application form where the user is required to fill in the details. To ensure our form doesn't look too bad, I'm going to add some CSS. So within the style block for our label, after an input element, set display inline flags. I'm also going to comment out the center text alignment style. Alright, now let's get started with our form. In the markup section, I'm going to add a form tag, and within the form tag, I'm going to add a div tag for our first form control, and this form control is to gather the name of the user. So label text is going to be name, and the for attribute is also going to be name. In the next line, let's add an input. Input type equals text and ID equals name, which corresponds to the for attribute on the label element. If we now save the file and take a look at the browser, we have our name form control. We can type in Rahul and input reflects that. However, the data is currently in the HTML section. We need to send it into the script section, and for that purpose, Svelte provides the bind directive. Now how does it work? Well, we begin by defining a variable that is going to keep track of the form control. So in the script section, I'm going to add new variable, let's call it form values, and this is going to be equal to an object. This property in turn will contain another property called name, which will track the input control value that we have just created. So name, and the initial value of name would be an empty string. Now you could omit the form values property, but it makes this demo much easier, as you are going to see in few minutes. Now once we have created the name variable, we need to bind it to the form control. We do that using the bind directive. So on the input element, we bind to the value property, and this is going to be equal to form values.name. Now if you were to enter the name, it would be tracked in the form values object. Let's stringify that object in the markup section to visualize how the data binding works. So above the form tag, I'm going to add a div tag. Within the div tag, I'm going to add a pre tag, and then within curly braces, json.stringify form values and pass in null comma 2 to display in separate lines. If you now save the file and head to the browser, you can see that we have the form values object and the name form control in the form values object. We have the name property whose value is an empty string. If I type Rahul, you can see the same in our stringified representation. So we have the binding form, the HTML to the script data and back to the HTML. What is great about Svelte is that it understands the different types of form controls and bind values accordingly at the moment. You can see that if I type number, the value is still a string with double quotes. If I add type is equal to number, though the value is automatically converted into a number. You might think this is how it would normally work, but that's not the case in vanilla JavaScript. If you were to have type is equal to number, the value would still be a string. Svelte on the other hand takes care of the type conversion for us. So this is pretty much how the bind directive works. Let's now look at few more examples. Since the name controls was the first usage of the bind directive, I wanted to take some time explaining how it works. Now that you have a good idea, I'm going to go over the rest of the example fairly quicker. Alright, the second form control in our job applicant form is to collect the profile summary of the candidate. This requires three simple steps. Step 1. Add a new property. So within form values, profile summary and set it to an empty string. Step 2. Add the HTML. So div tag, within the div tag, the label text is going to be profile summary, and in the text line we are going to add a text area field. So text area ID is going to be equal to profile, which should match the for attribute on the label, and this can be a self-closing tag. Now for the step 3, we bind the profile summary property using the bind directive. So bind : value is going to be equal to form values.profile summary. If we now save the file and take a look at the browser, we have our text area field type in our profile summary, and the same can be seen in the form values object. I'm guessing you are now getting a hang of working with forms in Svelte. Let's take a look at the select dropdown next. Let's say that we need to ask the user from which country they are from. Again, this involves 3 simple steps. Step 1. Create a new property. Create a new property called country and set it to an empty string. Step 2. Add the HTML. Label for is equal to country. The text is going to be country. Now to keep this simple, we are going to add only 3 countries, and I am going to copy paste the options. So the first option is select a country which has an empty value, and then we have 3 countries: Spain, Canada, United States, and the corresponding values. Now for step 3, we bind the property using the bind directive. So on the select element, bind to value form values dot country. If we now save the file and take a look at the browser, we have our select dropdown. Select a country and its value is reflected in the form values object: United States, Canada, and Spain. Now it's also possible to have a multi-select dropdown. Let's say we need the job applicant to select a list of countries where they are willing to relocate. This again can be done in 3 simple steps. Step 1. Add a new property. Job location, and the initial value is going to be an empty array. Remember, multiple values can be selected, so the initial value is an empty array and not an empty string. Step 2. We add the HTML. Now this is the same HTML for selecting a country with some modifications. So let's make a copy of the code and make the necessary changes. Copy the div block, paste it. The first change is the text. Change it to job location. The second change is the for and ID attributes. Change it to job-location. So this is step 2. For step 3, bind the correct property to the bind directive. It is form values.jobLocation. The third and final change, add the multiple attribute on the select HTML element. If you now save the file and head back to the browser, you can see that we have a multi-select HTML element. I can select Spain and the form values object updates with the value. Hold Ctrl and click on United States. That gets added to the form values object as well. Our multi-select elements works as expected. So let's take a look at the second half of the topic in the next video.